Okay, I want to welcome you all to our webinar today. We're going to take questions at the end of the event, but please, as you go ahead and type in your questions, and we'll, like I say, we'll have those and we'll address those at the end of the event. I guess just introduction, my name is Deke Smith, and I'm with Anna Thamer, and we're the co-chairs of the APPA TCO working group. This presentation was a presentation that Anna delivered at the conference just recently. For the most part, I wasn't there, so I'll be adding a little color, no, adding my comments on some of the slides. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. Let's see, I think. There we are.
So great. Just taking a look at what this presentation and our agenda for today, for the hour that we have you, taking a look at the introduction and just diving into the TCO definition. We're going to look a little bit further and how TCO strategies have evolved, and that just further helps us clarify the TCO definition. And then we're going to take a look at the APPA-ANSI TCO standard that we've developed and that is out for public review. We'll be looking at the key principles. That's phase 1. That portion is in the public review. Phase 2 is the total cost of ownership implementation and data elements. That one has not been written, but we will share some information on that phase with you today and what's to come. And then the last we'll look at is the TCO use cases. And we're really just providing some information to you on how we foresee the many ways that TCO can be used in your organization. So diving right in, we all have deferred maintenance, deferred capital renewal, backlog, just all kinds of issues with this and what can we do about it. Many of us, there are two radical approaches, and many of us don't have the luxury of having a brand new university right next door that you could just up and transplant your folks and move them to the new university. That's likely not going to happen. And while many of us would like our buildings to catch on fire or wait for them to catch on fire, we typically don't see that happening. Here's a great example. It's very rare that you see a building both flooding and on fire at the same time. I know there are buildings on our campus that I would hope that would happen to, of course, with nobody in it. But it's rare that we have those radical approaches to dealing with deferred maintenance and capital renewal. So what we do have are the traditional things that we've seen: FCI, preventive maintenance, historical costs, life cycle cost analysis, many other things. But we're being asked to do a whole lot more today than we were in the past. So if we take a look at this slide, you see that way back when we started facilities, we were physical plant, and we started out with just operations and maintenance. And over time, you see how that trend has just increased with responsibility all the way to today, where you see we've got space management, planning design, just a number of different things added on. And if you look at the last one, we're asked to do strategic planning with some of the organizations, especially within higher education. So we can't use the same tools or same approaches that we used in the past. And that's where total cost of ownership comes in. So if we take a look at the definition here, it I'll just go ahead and read it. A holistic approach to maximizing return on investment of managed physical assets that include the summation of all known and estimated costs to include first, reoccurring, renewal replacement, and end of useful life costs revised at critical decision points to aid in life cycle asset management decisions. Deke, you can share if you'd like, but we spent a lot of time coming up with this definition.
And I think, yeah, the issue here is one of the things we're looking at, of course, is that, you know, we've had life cycle costing out there for a while. So what is different about total cost of ownership from life cycle? And I think that total cost is really looking at the issue much more holistically. And we're looking at what are the impacts, the unintended consequences in some cases of going out and selecting a product. Or an approach. Do you need more training? Do you need more people? Things like that, which might not come into some of the early life cycle analysis that was done originally.
Yeah, and you know, just to make further note, at the top of almost every slide, it says, please note this is pre-decisional TCO definition, and it's not yet the product of the APPA1000 committee. We're still in public review. So all of this, really you can provide comments back to us. It is a little bit lengthy. We do know that. If you'd like to provide comments on how to maybe get that summarized a little bit better, we're open to hearing your feedback on that.
So what does go into total cost of ownership? It really is the formula really kind of looks at what are the initial asset costs, what are the cost of operation, cost of maintenance, cost of utilities, renewal, and removal and disposal. And like I say, that plus all the pieces that go along with that. So really, we're now looking at not only the summation of all those known and estimated costs, but the key is really being able to, you know, we haven't ignored life cycle. We're not replacing life cycle. Life cycle's still there. But we really want to look at what the impact is on all of our management decisions.
So this depicts the different levels or the different areas of total cost of ownership. And I only have 3 buckets here: project delivery, maintenance and operations, and recapitalization. We're missing some from TCO, but it's just for simplicity of this exercise. And Deke talked a lot about the holistic approach to TCO and how that aids in the life cycle assessment and management decisions. And so this is what we're hoping to depict here, is that when an asset goes from project delivery to maintenance and operations, there's a handoff of information that needs to occur between project delivery and maintenance and operations. Operations then tags that maintenance, the preventive maintenance, the trouble calls, the costs of that, man hours to that, within maintenance and operations, which in turn feeds into recapitalization. That information helps with when is the right time to replace, renew, or repair that asset. And then finally, that information feeds into project delivery. Whatever the reason that asset deteriorated much faster, was it design? Was it the type of asset? It may be a geographical, you know, you're right by the coast, so that asset may not be a good fit for your organization. So that would feed back into project delivery, into your standards. So if you'll just walk with me through this example, say we have a $100,000 asset and we've installed it, and it has a 10-year life cycle. That information gets passed on to maintenance and operations. We then see over 3 years that we've spent about $65,000 on issues, trouble calls, or maintenance of that asset. And as we know, that should not occur. That's about 65% of the current replacement value has been spent in about 3 years. And if that trend continues, you'd almost pay for that asset 3 times over the course of its life cycle if it was 10 years. So that's how this would play into that. Then you would say, okay, we need to make a decision to replace it, and then determine why that asset after 3 years was costing you so much money. And let's just say in this example, it was poor design. We need to make some changes to our standards and our design and construction standards. So that's an example of how TCO can help us make better decisions.
So let's take a step back a little bit and just look at what some real life examples, I guess you could say, of what TCO is. Some of you may have teenagers that are just coming into buying a car, and great having a new car or something like that. It's great up front. Hey, I've got the money to buy that car. But then the reality is that there's, not only the initial payment, and of course it depreciates when you drive it off the lot, but then you have all these other costs. And a lot of people don't necessarily think of those with that first cost, but the reality is that those are coming. Those are costs that you have to look at. And also, having that information allows you to make a decision, maybe between gas or hybrid or electric or a lot of different cars. We haven't seen a lot of this information necessarily showing up in because we're very first cost oriented in the construction industry for the most part. And we haven't seen a lot of that information showing up yet. But what we are starting to see is places like CarMax now. They will compare the different cars that you might want to select, and you can see that looking at what is the 5-year cost going to be, what is your cost per mile on these different cars. The reality is that same kind of thing happens with facilities also. It's no magic that different products are going to have different lifespans to them. And so we can predict that. We can take a look at that. We can do reserve studies and things like that go out and identify that these costs are in fact coming, and they are something we can plan on. We can plan on for 100 years, quite frankly. The roof is going to have to be replaced every X number of years for the whole life of the facility. And now it may not happen exactly at 25 years. The air conditioner might not fail exactly at 20 years, but the point is then you have the resources set aside and you're aware that these costs are coming, and it's not a surprise, and it allows you to take care of those kind of things. And with the first cost that we have, it's a problem because you might have a first cost that's very low, but then that also may mean that your quality is low, and it's going to be that building that Anna was talking about that should burn down or wash away, and you're going to have to still live with it whether or not any of those calamities occur.
So one example of that I found that really depicts what Deke is saying, there was a study done by Wolf, and this was on analysis for flooring. But they found that first cost was about 8% of the cost to own a floor. And I found that rather interesting and started to think, well, gosh, you're making a decision on 8% of the information. What decision do we make even on 50% of the decision and we feel good about? Just thinking about all the decisions I think we've made in our lives, you wouldn't want to choose even who you're going to marry with 50% of the information, much less 8% of the cost. And so Just really driving home the point that you don't have all the information if you're just basing your decision on that first cost. A first cost decision, really, we've kind of gone through an exercise. The only positive is cheaper today. There's a number of different, you have lower quality, minimal functionality, failing to meet the mission, and then you see an increase in a number of things, more maintenance, more unsatisfactory reviews, higher operation costs, and then sooner you increase the time in which you need to replace it. So if we take a look at just a really easy example that I think everybody is familiar with, Dee can walk us through what that looks like.
Well, I think, and this is one that probably most people have really already started making. And again, we just want to look at, put these in context with things that, knowledge that you inherently have. I mean, you may be doing this at home, you may be doing it at the university or wherever you're working, but we kind of know that standard incandescent is a really expensive way to go. And there's a lot of it's a low cost initially, but the problem is that it doesn't last very long and it uses a lot of energy. We went to CFL and everybody converted to CFL as quickly as they could, and then we found there's some little bit of problems with CFL if one of them breaks or something like that. And also, they certainly had a higher initial cost, but then they also did have a lower energy cost. But now we come up with LED, and oh my gosh, higher cost up front, although that price seems to be coming down a bit, but they last for a lot longer. They do much brighter than for the number of watts that you're using. So you're making significant changes in your cost of doing business, and it's phenomenal. And so if you track those over, say, 25 years, 23 years in this chart, I just put it out since it has to be replaced at 22 years, just to kind of take a look at what the impact would be. But your incandescent is, up over $200 for that same time period, where even after you've replaced the LED bulb, it's just over $50. So that's quite a bit of difference on just one light bulb. And so your payback really is less than 2 years, about a year and a half. So and I think, like I say, that decision is being made by a lot of people right now, but it's really going to be true for most products that we look at. The problem is we just haven't had good information to work with. One of the things that's changing now in the industry is there's several groups. There's BIM Object here, which has just been it's replaced Seek in Revit. As far as going out and finding product information as product libraries. There's also CoBuilder and NBS in the UK that have been doing the same thing. So the manufacturers are kind of getting on board with providing information. The problem is, again, most of these, since this is supporting building information modeling, it's primarily supporting right now it's supporting the geometry. So what we're looking at is being able to add the data elements. Now that once we have the objects identified, then we can add the data to those. And these companies have indicated an interest to working with us in adding total cost of ownership information. So I think the construction industry can start moving the same way as some folks like CarMax that are starting to make those changes. The other thing that we're seeing, and I think this is a real adjustment that the industry has to make, is moving towards an information thread. Most people still use computer-aided design. Some are starting to move to building information modeling, and with computer-aided design, we kind of have this diagram. We lose a lot of information as we hand off between planning, we hand off to design, we hand off to construction, and then we hand off to the owner for operation. And that's kind of the paper-based as-is approach that we've been using. The difference that is coming with the information age is really being able to continually collect information. You can still produce two-dimensional drawings, CAD drawings, and things like that, but if you or any other report that you need to be able to produce. But what happens is that you continually accumulate information, and you can spin off a set of drawings and not lose any information. You're continuing to increase your information knowledge about your project. And so what the potential return on investment of that is everything in between those two curves. And I think that's one of the real benefits of being able to now link some of these pieces together. And that's one of the things we're looking at with our total cost of ownership effort.
Great. So now that we've dived into our total cost of ownership definition and really driven home on how TCO is evolving out in the world today, let's take a look at what we've developed so far. We are dedicating this to our friend, leader and mentor, Doug Christensen, who passed away almost exactly a year ago today. And we dedicate this effort to him. He really was a big advocate for total cost of ownership and had implemented it. I thought he implemented it in 1980s, but his son actually told me he was doing these principles well before then. It just wasn't until the 1980s that he sort of put a name to it. And so really was successful with this at Brigham Young. So we're going to dedicate this to him. Why should we do a standard? Doug and I, and probably Deke as well, and many others had talked about putting together a book about TCO, and we wrote many articles. Deke has, I have, Doug has, but really a standard provides a common language, and it really puts together policy and a tool that supports constant improvement and supports goal setting. It really creates the way to provide a standard of asset care. And most importantly, it's for consensus. And we chose ANSI because it is the highest level standard in the United States. We're hopeful that it will be elevated to an ISO standard in the future. And ANSI is trusted by software companies, and they'll use this to develop their products as well. And ANSI provides a way for us to document our process and decisions as we move through this effort. So like I mentioned before, everything in here that we share, it's in public review. And that's the beauty of ANSI. You can provide comments. Billy is collecting those, and then we will review those. So there's a period for review that we're in right now. So that process is one that we respect.
And I think it's really important to understand the role of standards, because once you have a standard, then you get a following, you get a foundation of people that are supporting that standard. And as that happens, then the software vendors are more willing to invest in writing software to be able to support those standards. If everybody's doing something differently, they can't write software to be able to support it. Because you have to have a business process to really write software around. So having that group of followers that are now, potentially supporting the TCO standard, what will happen is then the tools will become more available, and that's what will move the industry forward. I think one of the things that's kind of unique to what we're doing, though, is that we're looking at not only how the ANSI standard is going to tie in and create the standard that we're working on right now. And that's going to be, as once it's approved, it'll be the U.S. implementation, really, of total cost of ownership. And as Anna said, the other part that we still have to develop is for implementation, the implementation side of it. And once those two pieces are in place, then I think that more people will follow it, and it will start become the standard of practice. But I think what's kind of unique about what we've been working on is that we're not only just just coming up with it from scratch, but we're really looking at how it ties in and how its support is supported by some ISO standards. And there's three significant ISO standards. 15686 service life is really probably the closest to being able to support what we're developing, but also ISO 55000 series for asset management is developing right now. And asset management obviously, has a large following because everybody has to manage their assets. The other one that's being developed is the 41000 series, facility management. The asset management standard, some of those pieces are out now and available. The facility management standards is still being developed. But what's kind of unique about all of that is they're based on other standards. And so the part 4 of the service life standard is tied to IFC's industry foundation class, which is the open standard for building information modeling. And that also then we are using OmniClass, and that is based on ISO 12006. So then that really ties into OpenBIM, which is, I mentioned, industry foundation class for building information modeling, and that ties into what's called the data dictionary and many other pieces. And possibly people have heard of COBie, and COBie is all based on and tied into industry foundation class. And as inside of COBie is OmniClass is tied to that, so that all these things tie together, I guess, is the bottom line. So we're not, we're basing it on a strong foundation, and a foundation which already has some followers worldwide to support these ideas. So I think that not only will it be important to the United States of implementing, but it'll also provide the metrics that we need in decision making for for all these pieces. So one of the things we just want to talk about is the committee that we've put together, and of course we had the three our three co-leaders, Doug and myself and Anna. What we did was Doug had done extensive work on developing the 13 TCO principles and through APPA. And so that's where we started with. And what we did was we broke into 4 different groups, a strategy work group, an assets work group, a costing work group, and a data and classification work group. Based on ANSI requirements, we had participants and we had balanced participants from each of the sub-working groups of users, producers, and general interest. So that group came together and compiled the initial draft standard, and now we're going through. We reached the consensus through the committee to go out for public review, and so now we're in the process of waiting to finish up going through the process of the ANSI approval. So it's we've used kind of a modified Delphi approach where we work together, we work separately. There are 24 members in the working groups, and they've all been assigned to those different groups, and it's worked pretty well in putting all this together. One of the things that ANSI requires is that we keep very close records on all these things, and so we have records of who voted and who participated in different meetings and all this, and and so the consensus that we reached was an honest consensus of all these people, and these are different experts that that we have identified and put together onto the team.
And here's a list of those experts. They come from all different backgrounds. You'll see NASA on there, Jacobs, of course, where I'm from UT Austin. Deke's organization is on there, GSA. So we have a good, well-rounded group, as Deke mentioned, that were participated in this effort. So really feel good about the work we've done. The ANSYS APPA1000 standard has two main parts. One, establish the key principles, which we just looked at, which we'll look at now, and then the part 2, which Deke shared, is under implementation. So let's take a look at the 13 key principles. They very well align into 3 major groups. So there's a foundational group, an informational gathering group, and then a decision-making group. Within the foundational groups, we see the major key principles of what assets we're managing, how we are going to inventory them, how we're going to locate them with our global location hierarchy, and then our asset classification. So those really become the foundation that you need to have in place prior to doing total cost of ownership. After that, you can then start gathering information on those key principles, and you can gather the asset costing, the asset inspection or assessment, and then how that asset is performing. From those, you then can make decisions. You have the foundation, you've gathered information, and now you can make decisions. And those top 2 really are joined by our data management and verification principle. So that principle really talks about how we can ensure that that information is accurate. We don't want junk in to make junk out, to make bad decisions. And then the last 2 principles, asset reporting and asset information sharing, really impact all of the principles, all of the 10 that reside within the foundational informational gathering and decision making. Deke really articulated well how we've tried to align with the ISO 15686 and other international standards. And so this chart also depicts the principles within their grouping. So you'll see the data foundation, the data information gathering in the middle with those principles there, and then the data decisions, and then with the overarching principles shown in green. And what we did below that in red really just showed how we use that ISO 15686. This was just one example of how we joined with a standard, and we just showed how those related in which areas and which buckets. This was really helpful to us to conceptualize how we were going to address the work and how to use the information that was already existing to help us define the work that we did in this draft document.
So so that's pretty much what we've accomplished to this point. And so now what we're starting to look at, based on what we've done with the identifying the principles, now what is the what is the part 2 going to start looking like? So we started thinking about that, and we're starting to put the committee together for looking at part 2 while we're out with comments for part 1. So we're not going to let any grass grow under our feet here. We're going to move right ahead. And what we've looked at is we recognize that there's if we just put this whole thing out as one big piece, it would probably be seen as a mountain too high to climb. There's just a lot to it, and so we recognize that there's going to be whether you might have a small situation, you might not need a lot of information, you have small portfolio, and you might not have the wherewithal to really capture all the data that you might want to have to do a full TCO implementation, but that doesn't mean you can't do TCO. And I think that's one of the things we really want to stress here is that everybody can do this. We've got to get off of this first cost approach. We've got to look at the overall cost, because really we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're not being very good stewards, as Anna mentioned with the 8%. You're not being a very good steward if you're only managing 8% and not really worried about, or just being surprised by that the rest of the picture. But at the same time, we can also look at the higher end of implementation, where information is more available, and information will become more available as time goes on. I think that's what we're finding as we move into the information age, that that is going to happen. And so, let's go back to our first cost example again, our light bulb. Because I think that's again a way to easily understand, and the data elements that have been provided for these light bulbs do give you a lot of information to be able to help make a decision. We're looking at what the name is, what the CRV is, what the age, how and what the life cycle, how long is it going to last. And so we look at things like in our example, the LED bulb, what its initial cost of $12. It's brand new. It got a 0 age, but it does have a life cycle of 22.8 years based on that information that we got. So this is the basic end of getting started with all of this, and we should expect manufacturers to at least be able to provide this information, and ultimately those product libraries to be able to provide this kind of information. Obviously, there's a lot more information that can go into it, if you go back to the CFL example. What does it cost now if a CFL bulb breaks and you have to do cleanup? It's a hazardous situation to clean up the mercury that's in those bulbs, and that's an additional cost that we really didn't see before. But those are the kind of things that you end up having to deal with as you do your work. So just with those four pieces of information, we're able to plot a chart like this and be able to identify what is it going to cost for at least looking out for the next 25 years. Sure, some bulbs are going to fail early, and some bulbs are going to last a lot longer. But at least you have the basic concept of how much it's going to cost you, and it's only going to cost you about $64 versus $230 over this time phase. So taking that into the kind of the next step of looking just at a chart, and we're saying, okay, as a basic starting point, you're looking at your asset management, you're looking at your service life, which is basically the TCO principles that you can start with to be able to make a decision and support the decision, just like we had with a light bulb example. Over time, those product libraries will be available, or information certainly is going to be available about the products, whether or not it's formally organized into a product library or not, and that'll allow you to do your maintenance reviews and things like that. And so as we expand on that a little bit, now we get into some additional things. We start looking at maybe being able to bring in building information, model information. And the issue there is that a lot of people are producing building information models. A lot of your contractors are potentially even providing building information models on new buildings. But a lot of owners right now aren't able to use that, or haven't changed their business processes to allow that. One of the other things that I think is probably appropriate is to think about putting value engineering back into the mix. Value engineering as it was originally intended, not value engineering as it's currently being used to basically cheapen the project. I think that's how most people use value engineering today. It's to be able to go through and to say, okay, we busted our bid. We've got to go out and get rid of some stuff. Let's value engineer things out of the project. And that really wasn't what it was intended. Value engineering was originally intended to be able to provide a look at what are other ways that you can provide similar functions. And so in our light bulb example, we get down into the weeds and trying to decide, which kind of light bulb we want to get. But maybe we ought to take a step back and say, maybe I should use daylighting. And daylighting then I don't have any energy costs involved. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, depending on the situation and when you use the space and things like that. But at least it could also reduce your costs. So I think that's what value engineering was, as I say, was originally intended to be. So now at a fully engaged, full information flow and things like that, we'll have asset information model, we'll have a data dictionary, we'll have all these other parts. We'll have facility management standards that'll be put in place, like we mentioned earlier, on the ISO 41000 series. And of course, those all these things take time. We recognize that to get implemented, but it is what's coming. There's no question about it. How soon it'll get here, I'm a very poor predictor of that, because I think a lot of these things should be in place now, and for some reason we've been dragging our feet on getting even life cycle costing in place in a big way.
The other key element of this phase is developing the data, what's needed to implement TCO from a data perspective. I'll leave that up there for you all to read and won't go line by line on that, but I'll share a story with you on why data is important. Walmart has the largest civilian database in the nation. They know exactly what's coming in. They know exactly what's going out, meaning what people are purchasing. So a hurricane was coming to hit one of the areas where they had stores, and they had another store that had been hit last year, and so they had data on what was selling. So they could use the data to figure out what they were selling, or they could just go off of what people thought and what we think about when a hurricane's coming. And very quickly, if I asked you the question, what should they stock the store with? You'd say, water, batteries, generators. So why do you need the data to tell you what to stock that store with? Well, interestingly, Walmart found that the number one thing that they should stock their store with, based on this other stores and the historical data, was batteries. The second thing was beer. So very, very close to water, but just a little bit different, flavored. And then the third thing was Pop-Tarts. So very interesting that, what you might consider to, oh gosh, we know that. The same thing with your facilities. Gosh, I have people that have been on campus for 25 years. We know where our issues are. We know what needs to be replaced. We know when to replace it. We've got this down. But I challenge you to really think about the data that's needed so that you can identify, maybe you have a Pop-Tart on your campus. Maybe there's a Pop-Tart there. So data is really important for us. So the last piece of this is the widespread adoption and use. And in order for us to get you really excited about that and help us really market the total cost of ownership, our last section will talk about the use cases of TCO. And so we've put together a list, and we have 5 that we've identified. And the first one is our budget analysis and support. So how does TCO help you with your budget analysis and support? Well, let's take a look at that. TCO, if you'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, for some reason. Okay.
Animations are fun. TCO how we can apply it to budget analysis and support. TCO gives us a really holistic and comprehensive view of our entire organization's assets. And so you having that whole picture of your entire campus before deciding to add current facility, add assets, whether you need to repair major facilities, that's where TCO can really start to work for you. And it also ensures, by giving you this bigger view, that you have enough resources for a TCO of all your existing and new assets. And if you don't, that you're able to communicate what budget you do need, where are your gaps in your budget that would get you to a full TCO implementation or view of your assets. So let's take a look at how that might look in terms of your annual budget. So your annual budget is really like an MO&E. It's your yearly allocation for today's costs. You then have your projected facilities costs, and those really are what you need in the future. Maybe that's in 5 years, maybe that's in 10 years. And what's really important about this is that these are independent but linked together. And with the total cost of ownership, you really can see both of these joined, and you will be able to make better decisions. The same thing with your new construction and replacement budgets, along with your maintenance and operations budgets. You will see that those need to be independent, but also very much linked. For example, your repair and replacement and renewal program, we call that R&R at UT Austin, really needs to coincide and work with your maintenance and operations budget so that those are in alignment. They need to be very much linked, and TCO allows you to do that. All right, and so the next one, decisions to renovate or remove an asset. How does TCO help with that? Let's take a look at that one. With TCO, you can make better informed decisions about those 4 options. Do you do nothing? Do you repair it? Do you retrofit it, or do you replace that asset? And TCO really provides you with a means to really look at, if I'm a technician within O&M and they're going to replace it in 2 years, how does that help me make a decision about how I'm going to repair that asset today? Obviously, emergency decisions are not planned, and those have to be taken as they come. But TCO really allows us to make those decisions. We base if we're going to replace that asset, on our investment life, on its useful life, and then on its life cycle. But most importantly, what's missing from here is also on its performance. And so that condition assessment or that inspection will help to also feed into your decision for your total cost of ownership application.
And so the next one is looking at existing facilities and your infrastructure assets. This as we said, this will apply for all aspects. And so existing facilities, a lot of times, you don't necessarily have the information, but you can certainly go out and get it. You can go out and do a study of your existing assets. You can identify how much life is left in there. You can identify the maintenance requirements in the schedule. This is often called a reserve study. And basically it's for setting up a reserve, so you'll have the money in place to be able to handle these problems that we identified earlier, that that we know are going to happen. This diagram happens to be from San Jose Airport. We did a workshop on this just recently and talked about TCO for a BIM storm. And here's an example of a reserve study that basically goes through and identify. This is actually our homeowners association, which, just to give you an idea, this is scalable. This scales all the way down to just working on a swimming pool or working on a small building, clubhouse building, and things like that. We can project out how many, when different things are going to happen. Cycle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Something's going to be replaced every 20 years or every 3 years or whatever. And you can identify what kind of costs, and then you can put together and companies will do this for you. You can do it yourself. You can go in and put together a diagram of identifying just how much money are you going to need at different points in time in the future to be able to cover these costs. And so you'll have that money available. You'll be able to go out and budget for it and look ahead and know that you're going to have maybe you'll have a big spike that's coming in the future. Now you can talk also about doing some resource leveling and saying, well, maybe I'll go ahead and replace this now because I know that it's going to be a problem. Even you can apply these for your own home and say, okay, I have a hot water heater, and a hot water heater's has a life of about 10 to 12 years before it starts leaking. Well, my hot water heater is in my basement, and the last time it leaked, I had to replace carpeting and do other work and replace some drywall and things like that. Well, maybe it's better off for me to go ahead and replace it at 10 years and not have the risk of having those additional costs that might come along. And so those are the kind of things that, being a little bit ahead of the schedule and preventive maintenance. And looking at a notional 25-year plan, what you'll see here is that you have an increasing risk of the yellow line there is an increasing risk of system failures as you go through time. But there's also costs. There's periodic renovation that you're going to do that will affect your facility condition index. And it, once you do the work, then it drops back down a little bit, and over time it increases a little bit. And you have to decide, what kind of sensitivity do you have to the facilities not looking their tops? One of the things that came up in one of our earlier conversations was that kids, when they come on campus, make their decision about going to that school in the first 5 minutes, and a lot of it is facility related. If things are run down and looking pretty bad, they may decide to go to a different school, and so that's where we as facility managers have a role to play in making sure that the whole system works together.
All right, so there's 2 remaining, and I'll quickly go through them because they're sort of a re-review of what we've already presented. When you're selecting your assets, Deke very well went through choosing from our example the incandescent CFL or LEDs, and he showed us how using our TCO summation of costs on the next slide, really on how that works to produce answers. So he showed just with the 4 basic elements, we're able to then make a decision on how TCO can help us choose an asset. And then the last one on new facilities and infrastructure, it's the same concept. You definitely need to use that same formula. And if you've noticed, we've used this formula multiple times in our presentation because it's really key to total cost of ownership. It is part of the definition. It's a summation of costs. And when you're deciding on a new facility or a large infrastructure or an asset within that new facility, it's really important that you can use this summation in the TCO to come up with that decision. So we showed you some use cases. We go back to our proposed definition. I'll remind everybody again, it is pre-decisional and it's not yet approved. It is still in draft form, and we're accepting comments on that now.
And you can go ahead and if you want to contact Billy at APPA.org, you can get a copy to review yourself, and it provides a comment sheet, and you can turn that in. And we were happy to get all those comments. It looks like we have a few questions, not too many. JIT was one of the, what is JIT? Just in time. And that probably had more meaning on the slide that we were on. And I guess we had a little bit of problem with the audio. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. Yes, we will provide this slide deck, and we'll just send it out to all of the people that attended the session. And I think those were the only questions. Unless anybody else has any additional questions, you can type them in, and we'll stay on for a few more minutes. Otherwise, I think we're just about pretty close to the top of the hour. We got about 5 minutes left. If anybody does have any other questions, and certainly Anna and I would be more than happy to take any additional questions that you have after the session, once you get the slides and things like that, after you've had a chance to take a look at them. I know sometimes when you're in a presentation like this, you're getting a whole wave of information and things don't hit you until later on. And like I say, we really do want to get your feedback, because as we get into the implementation phase, that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will, and that we want to make sure that we do cover the issues that people have, so that people will implement total cost of ownership, and hopefully, like I say, we can get the construction industry out of the first cost mentality. Let's see. I noticed it's being recorded. Yes, we'll make the recording also available, and we'll have a link to that. So because it's typically pretty large. The difference between total cost of ownership and life cycle analysis was the question. And I think that the example, one example that I know we've talked about is if I put in a high-tech security system, and that high-tech security system requires having additional training and education, and maybe somebody on staff to be able to operate it. Is that going to be more expensive than it would be just to hire another guard? And in total cost, you don't necessarily look at that, but we're now looking at staff issues. We're looking at another example might be if you're going to put in a piece of equipment, and that equipment requires extra heating and ventilating, or it requires additional power. One example that just recently, we can apply these to homes as well as offices and everything. I was thinking about putting in a tankless water heater. And when I talked through that issue, I don't have gas, so we'd have to do electric. And the question then was, okay, I didn't have enough electric service to the space where I wanted to put in the tankless hot water heater. So it ended up being more expensive. I couldn't recoup the cost of my tankless water heater because of the additional service that I'd have to provide to be able to allow that to happen. So you've got to look at a bigger picture and what are all those ancillary aspects that come in. And I don't know if Anna has some other examples possibly.
I think for me, life cycle cost is, in the past, when I started doing this, gosh, many years ago, life cycle back then was just the maintenance and operations and the repair and replacement costs. And over time, life cycle cost has sort of started to add more of the purchase cost definition, because it just makes sense. You need to include that. And I think there's just a delineation between life cycle cost analysis is that first part, which is a calculation or summation. But total cost of ownership, as Deke was explaining, it goes a step further outside of just a summation. It's taking information from the performance of the asset, from that condition assessment, and making decisions about what to do with it over the life of it. I think is where it really delineates from the life cycle cost analysis, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, as far as what is the key to making all of this widespread, I think it's just starting to use it. And like I say, that's the easy part is just going out and getting reserve studies done on your existing facilities and things like that. And just really kind of saying, you know, first cost is really costing me too much money. It's not a sustainable approach. And I know one of the things that Doug Christensen had done was, you know, at their university, set it up so that the board of directors would not approve a new project until they had the total cost of ownership number. And what that did was made sure that they didn't add more facilities than they could afford. And the bottom line was, in some cases, they had to maybe, you know, shut down a facility in order to be able to add a new facility to their portfolio. And I think those are the kind of things, those are the kind of decisions that are really good stewardship decisions that we need to make. And with just first cost, you don't have that opportunity to do that. So everybody that's on this call has a role to go out and start the ball rolling, and start using TCO. And I see with that it is 1 o'clock, and so we won't take any more of your valuable time, but we will make sure we get the recording and a link to both the recording and the slides made available to you. With that, I say thank you, and I'll let Anna say thank you also.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Bye-bye.